Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Tiritidis, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. Got another guest on from a little bit of a different realm. Obviously very applicable to what we talk about on a daily basis, but it's not a college baseball coach, but somebody who I think is going to be able to shed a ton of light and speak to one of the more important parts of recruiting and development. But I'm going to kick it over to you to finish out the introduction here, Coach.
Sure. Tonight we are joined, very good friend of mine, very good friend of my wife's, somebody who I've known for 15 years now. Fall of 2009, when I started at Siena College, he was there as the head strength and conditioning coach, and he stayed there for a while. I'll let him kind of give this background as we go, but very diverse background. We're going to talk about strength and conditioning and the things that it is that you need to do. You know, we were talking pre-show about the amount of guys have come on here and talked about how important it is, and I could not think of anybody that I adore more and think the world of to come on here and talk about this stuff. But tonight we're joined by a very good friend of mine, Dr. Dan Taylor. DT.
Hey, thank you very much. Love you too. I love you guys. This is great.
Thanks.
I'm excited to do this. I can definitely do a bit of rundown of my background and kind of the things I've done. But I think what's important, and I think we talked about it before, is that my personal sort of, I don't want to say speciality, but a lot of it has been in basketball. But these themes are going to cross everything. It's all about sort of optimization of performance and getting people to be ready for whatever their thing might be. But my whole background starts, I was a college basketball player. I'm from England originally, came over here to play basketball in college with the entire idea of going back to Europe and playing. Did a couple of years at a JUCO, did a couple more years at a D2 school, graduated, didn't go back, got married, and I started personal training. So my whole journey in sort of physical development and optimization of performance, again, starts with personal training. Did that for 3.5 years. Then I started at Siena. I started there in 2007, so a couple of years before Keith. And yeah, I was the head strength coach there for almost a decade, worked with every sport, which was as varied as water polo right through to men's basketball, and clearly a ton of time with baseball. In 2016, I moved down south to Atlanta, worked at Georgia Tech, where I worked specifically and a little bit of tennis. And then in 2021, I became the applied sports scientist with the Charlotte Hornets NBA team. Did that for 3 and a bit years. And then I now work as part of a NASCAR team in the Charlotte area, but it's specifically at a biomechanics lab on campus, or on their sort of campus, so to speak, that looks at the pit crew members for the NASCAR team, but also across sports. So baseball, basketball, we've done some dance work, volleyball. So pretty much everybody when it comes to sort of movement efficiency and the sort of forces and stuff that apply to it. So super varied. My academic background is very varied as well to kind of match it. But again, I always think to the point of the introduction from you guys, which is very nice. It's always been about helping people and solving problems. And really those problems end up being around optimization of performance. And that's useful for anybody.
Yeah. I think the one thing that our listeners and what we're trying to get through to people, and I think the people who listen as much as they have over the last year and a half, we're trying to get more people to come on to talk about some things that aren't just baseball specific related things. And, you know I mentioned this already. We were talking on the pre-show, and Andy and I have had this conversation quite a bit over the last couple of months. Is like, we've done 50 plus interviews, and every single college baseball coach who's come on here has been like, the physicality and being in the weight room is a huge part of our program now. And, for Andy and I, who played in the early 2000s, like, yes, the weight room was a big piece of what we did, but it wasn't as sport specific. It wasn't to your point, like optimization of movement and being able to do things at a high rate. It was more, in my personal opinion, it was more like, all right, let's see how big we can get and how hard can we throw it? How hard can we hit it? And, I felt like we were, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like we were kind of on the front end of what has become that movement of getting people to become more like being able to move better, being able to be more of an athlete, being a little bit more sport specific in your training, to where, like maybe barbell bench press isn't the best for pitchers.
Yeah.
and like that was an argument for years. And
no doubt. I think there's definitely a bunch of thoughts that we can hit different areas here. There's a maturation period when it comes to weight training and strength and conditioning in sports. And there's certain sports like rugby, obviously where I'm from, American football over here, that it just sort of immediately meets. You got to be huge, you got to be strong. Genetically, a lot of those guys kind of come to the table with features that do well with weight training. Wrestling would probably be another one, but just sports where it's sort of like a no-brainer. And you go back to the history of strength and conditioning, and lo and behold, those are the sports that the sort of industry came up in. But then there's these other sports. Obviously, my background in basketball, it's super young in basketball. In baseball, like you said, I think it was probably a little bit earlier adopted than basketball, but it was very much around just move big weights, and then we will be able to hit balls further and throw balls harder. And it's not quite as simple as that. You know what I mean? And I think that it's particularly in college, you can get watered down a little bit because baseball teams are quite big and depending on the facilities available. But it's just more than just that. It's more than just, pitchers, you don't touch their upper body, but they squat a lot. Hitters, they bench really, really heavy and this, that, and the other. But there's also it's a massively rotational sport. So are we doing things that are going to enhance the ability to rotate at speed and separate hips and shoulders and all these things that are just really, really important to the training? And I think, and this is a little bit of a pat on our back, I think it's Siena, because we, particularly with you guys and the staff you were with, which I think was arguably the most successful staff I worked with from the baseball perspective. We were just really big on collaboration, always. It wasn't like, coaches out of the weight room, me in the weight room. It was like, what do you know? What do I know? What can we talk about? What do the guys need? And so on and so forth. So I think there's this maturation piece in sports that needs to sort of grow up and people need to understand. The other thing that I think is important for parents that have kids that are sort of coming up through this and are listening to the advice you guys give, and actually the kids themselves, is what is going to separate you. That's always my thing, is like, yeah, we all want to play pro. We all want to play the highest level we can. I mean, everybody that's talking right now has done that. What's going to separate you? And I think this is kind of a rule for life in general. But if we're all going to the same clinics and we're doing the same drills, listen to the same people, there has to be something that's going to separate you. And doing more of those things usually isn't it. And I know from talking to Keith, that's a very much like an ethos to the company that you guys have built, is to like do that stuff smartly. That bit aside, though, the one thing that you can separate yourself from quite easily is training. So that is weight training, that is conditioning properly to what you're doing, and also recovery. Obviously that's something that's an easy conversation with pitching, but just in general, if you can recover better than anybody else, well, you can throw again, you can hit again, you're the next guy up, you can train more, you can practice, you can go to the clinics. So recovery is part of weight training and strength and conditioning too. It's not just my 315-pound bench press. So again, I think the two things are baseball growing up and implementing better techniques and better concepts and just get bigger and stronger. And I think, again, for sort of youth and parents listening, is what is going to be the biggest separator. And again, if we're all doing lots of baseball, it's what you're not doing that's going to separate you. And that usually is, in this case, obviously you watch film and some things to understand the game. It's going to be the weight room. It's in every single step of the way I've been, from working in the NBA right through to developmental stuff. It's always something to do with your physical development, hands down.
I think the one thing, and I want to pull this thread for just a little bit because my wife is chiming in from the side, but it's also extremely important because I think that it's something that I would say, towards the tail end of my coaching career, like it started to become a lot more prevalent and a lot more talked about, is the recovery piece.
Yeah.
And I think for baseball football is extremely tough, right? Like it's a physical game. You're getting beat up, but you play, like, I've always viewed it through the lens of like, you play once a week. Like baseball, and I hate this term, but baseball can be a grind. Like you're playing 56 games in such a short period of time. Like the recovery piece is so big, especially for college athletes, because I think we get lost as coaches where like they're still students. Like, yes, we all say like they're student athletes and we want them, but like they still have to go to class. They still are studying for tests. And like there was times when I was at RPI, like I'll never forget when my second and third year being a head coach, that we would have test weeks at RPI where guys would they would come in and they were zombies.
Yeah.
Because they had, we're lifting, we're practicing, we're in the middle of our season. And oh, by the way, they have 4 monster tests in differential equations and thermals and fluids. And like, they're up till 3:00 in the morning to study for this test. And by the time they get to practice, they're just walking zombies. And I finally got to the point where I was like, yo, I need to know when this is going on, because we're going to completely back off practice. And instead of going heavy in the weight room that week, like, we'll do recovery yoga or whatever it is, because this, like, hammering you in this part isn't going to work because we've done it for so long. And then you wonder why we get swept that week, or we win one of 2.
No doubt.
And it's like, you kind of, and I think that that's something that doesn't get talked about enough in baseball, because you do need to recover. And sometimes it's, sometimes it can be in the weight room. Other times it might be like, yo, we're just going to go super light practice wise, like stretch throw. We're taking 35 minutes of BP and we're getting out of here.
Yeah.
Like, that's all. And, but I want to pull that thread just a little bit, because I think like it's become a very big thing, but I think it's very new in the baseball world. And I think for younger kids who are going through the recruiting process of like traveling Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and playing in these tournaments, and like, what do you need to do? Because you're not sleeping in your own bed. You're on the road in the hotel. You're probably eating out every single meal. Like, what does that look like for these kids too? So like, they need to hear this type of stuff.
No, you couldn't. I mean, this is definitely an area that I know we all agree on and have lived through. I think the first thing I want to say before we hit the recovery bit is that it doesn't so recovery, massively important, and exactly everything you've said, which we'll get into. It doesn't take away from that you have to do the work to earn the right to recover, because there is an element of like, but just too much bands and too much stretching, and like there needs to be blocks of time when you are getting after it, appropriately, intelligently, and purposefully. But you have to make sure you have that block, because that's the developmental bit. What we're talking about, though, is absolutely critical. Something that was very similar at Georgia Tech to RPI, because both of them obviously very high achieving academic schools. And this is more on the basketball front, but it's the same thing. When we had finals week and the study week, the study days before, same thing. Practice sucked. We usually lost the games. It was almost like, not a joke, but like a thing that was coming up. And I was the same as you. I'm like, why don't we do something different then? Like, we obviously know what's happening, and to your point, they're not pros. So you can't take away from studying and study hall and all of it, and the final schedule itself. So why don't we change what we're doing and actually support them in recovering for this sort of outrageous period of time of study, which will elicit good responses to be able to play these games. And I never really fully won that battle, because that's something I'll get into in a second. But the times that we did do well by them, everybody thrived, including the coaching staff. Practice was shorter, they were better, more efficient. Guys got more out of it. The lifts were more purposeful and more meaningful. The problem comes in, and college is very bad at this, and this is across sports, not just baseball, but there's this sort of like, don't be soft on them. You know what I mean? Like, there's this sort of like throwaway thing about being soft and about letting them off the hook. And I have always detested that. And you've known me well. Well, you and I, we think very much alike, which is why I never a problem. But I've always detested that, because for a few reasons. One, even if you don't understand physiology, it's just common sense. You know what I mean? But there's something about coaching, and you both sat in these chairs, and obviously Keith, I know you more so. And there is this bit where you have to kind of let go this control thing of like, no, we got to do more, and we got to stay sharp, and we got to stay strong. And if we take the day off the weight, like, just let it go, because you can't. You're fighting forces that you can't win. So there's this element of like, don't be soft on them, don't go easy on them. But again, that goes back to my first point. If we've done the work, then it's almost a reward in itself, and we're supporting recovery. And then I mean, the one thing that we did, which I thought was good, going back to Siena days, we threw in, I don't even know what we called it. It was like I don't even remember what it was. It was like the Olympics or something, but it was like a fun, almost like a strongman event. And I always worked with you to make it where the loading wasn't really that high. The sort of like, I don't want to call it, I'm going to call it fun factor, but not like, messing around with fun, was up. So you have this ability to blow steam off, still do like stuff, and still like, some cardiovascular stuff, whatever. But I'm messing around with the loading. So I think one time we were throwing cards for reaction time.
Yep.
And there was no weights, and the guys were competitive and screaming and shouting. So like, yeah, we can still do stuff. and it's still recovery, and so on and so forth. So I won't kind of beat that horse to death too much, but it definitely is a coaching flaw to even if you have identified it, because the college schedule and the college class schedule isn't going to change. That's on you to change. You know what I mean? And then in the NBA and obviously in pro baseball, and even I would say, when you guys really get going in the spring, recovery becomes, more important than the actual lifting. I mean, you're going to have a day or two during the week when you can get one, quote unquote, good lift in, but you need to master that recovery on the road and in hotel rooms and when you come back in. And the other thing that, for young listeners who maybe don't know this, is that recovery is also quite individualized. So yeah, we're all going to get in the ice bath and ice down, but for you, ice might work perfectly, but for me, it might be something that's more of a deep tissue thing. So what are you going to do about that? Well, get foam rollers, get tennis balls, get like everyone's going to recover differently because the body's so adaptable. You need to find out what the thing is for you. Sleep. I mean, it's the most boring old man thing in the world. I mean, we were just joking around about you going to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, but sleep is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And I never lived it, thank God. But you guys, particularly, coming at the mid-major Siena, would take these insane bus trips to Texas, like just crazy bus trips. So you better learn to sleep because A, you got nothing else to do, but B, that's your recovery. Same thing in the NBA. I mean, we have all that we had, had all the sort of drinks and supplements and Normatec boots and you name it. It's the NBA. So we have pretty much anything at our fingertips. Biggest thing, though, got to get some sleep. You on the planes, like we're giving them sort of music and almost like meditative soundtracks and so on to help these guys sleep because they were so jacked up from games. And then we're traveling to back-to-backs, and the types of lifts that we were doing were just to get the sort of like lowest amount of response to keep certain gains. But really, it was all about recovery because it was all coming so fast. So again, you've got to do the work first in your off seasons and your pre-seasons, the big piece in the fall, depending on where your school's at, when sort of fall ball's done. Absolutely. That's where you're going to get your gains. But for you to be at your best, to be able to show what you've got, win games and sort of like, whatever your thing is, you've got to be able to recover from it. And that's its own journey. And, luckily I worked with enough bad coaches to know the difference, but enough good coaches like yourself and your incredible wife, where that was a conversation that we all had. Even if we didn't want to have it,
right.
Because some of these kids, they were a pain in the ass, but it's like, it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like you got to give a little bit. So, and then the only other thing I would say too, from that point of view is I think sometimes, and I think this is true of younger coaches that kind of get a chance to kind of run their own programs, be it like travel ball or in, pros or college, is don't forget we did it too. You know what I mean? So it's not like give them an out if they're doing something social that maybe isn't the best idea. I don't mean that. I just mean we know what it felt like to get off the bus and have to go pitch. We know what it felt like to have to fly, boom, boom, boom. Like we did it. So like at least fall back on, you knew let me get some sleep, let me eat, let me go foam roll. Like, you don't need to have a doctorate. You just listen to yourself and you'll do well with that too. So we can keep going on that, Keith, but those are like the first 2 or 3 things that I think about.
I think the one thing, to your point, and I loved the day I walked in, I was like, yo, you want to do a competition, like a week-long competition? You were like, I've been wanting to do this for months. No one wants to do it. And I continued doing that when I was at RPI as an assistant and then as a head coach, where exactly to your point, where like we've been overloaded, we need rest and recovery, where it's like, yo, we need a break. Like, let's do something for 35, 40 minutes. And like, there were days where it was just like, let's just create some, like, I'm going to say stupid, but like, I don't mean it in the sense of like stupid. Like, let's just create some stupid things that we can get them to compete in and see what happens. And inevitably you end up getting more out of it because like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay. Like I don't have to go super heavy, but like, I can compete in throwing a ball into a net from 127 feet away. Exactly. And I can get after it with my teammates, and I want to win this. Yeah. And all of a sudden, like, you end up walking out of there being like, damn, we actually had it might not have been the best baseball practice we've had, but we got something out of today. Yeah. It's not a complete waste. And like, I would do the reaction ball stuff and throw cards and like whatever. Like, and remember we did I'll never forget this. Remember we did the plate push? And we did it on it was on the plastic floor. Yeah. and like no, like they couldn't push it. And you and I were like, this might not be a good idea.
Yeah, so
like not one of those kids quit.
No.
Like not one of them quit.
Nope.
And I was like, all right, like we're gonna be pretty good this year. I remember walking upstairs and Coach Rossi being like, how was it? I was like, we were a little worried. It was touch and go for a minute, but like not one of those kids quit. Like it was. I mean, I remember Teddy Trubinsky was like picking it up and trying to carry it.
And that's the thing is, and that goes into. I mean, this is a slight veering off what we were talking about, but it's a kind of getting what you need, because in that moment as a coach, you need some level of work, you need focus, you need, I don't want to say team building because there is the element of that, but like, I don't know, competition.
Yep.
That's what you need. You don't need a squat PR finals week. That's what you need. And like you said, it can be hard and fast and get out, but that's also what the guys need, or the ladies need, depending, that's what they need. But that way, then everyone's needs are met. So it's also not like, that's the other thing about recovery too. There is definitively a time to just go, leave, get out of here, go sleep, go to the library. Do something else. But there's also like, and this was, I had this discussion with a bunch of coaches that either kind of got it or didn't get it, is we can do something completely different. I mean, with Coach Speck and the lacrosse team, I think we did with baseball a little bit. We went in the pool because the good thing about that, we had the most ghetto pool ever, obviously, but like it was easy to get in it, like because it was just easy access to it. But we did tons of pool stuff. So we did pool recovery, which is great. And Brian, as you know, did a whole bunch of stuff too for the pitches. But we also did like some bootleg version of water polo with the lacrosse guys. And I can't remember if we did it with you guys. And so it had nothing to do with anything except for the fact it was unloaded because you're in the water. There's a bunch of recovery things that come from being in water, which is a different discussion. But it was also super competitive because this is just a bunch of lax pros trying to beat each other, throwing volleyballs at tables. That's all it was. But we got the most out of it in doing that. But again, what they didn't know, because we had these creative conversations, obviously you, me, and Jimmy, and on the lacrosse side, with like, okay, this is what we're going to do to be competitive, and this is what we're going to do to get a useful session tick. But what actually we're trying to get, we're trying to offload their legs. We're trying to not use shoulders too much. We're trying to eliminate contact, whatever the hell it might be. We're just like, these guys are just dead. The water's cold. It's going to wake their asses up before they go to, I don't know, whatever they were doing. So because there was this really good ego-free line of communication between coaches and practitioners, and obviously Brian in the training room, shout out Brian, it was just this easy way of doing things. And I've always, again, all the different paths I've walked, that collaboration between knowing who to talk to on the team. So it's like one of the players where they're not like Giansanti or Trubinsky or guys where they're going to tear their arm off for you. So if they're telling me that they're tired or I can just tell they are, that's one. Obviously communication with you guys 2, and then the training room 3, and then I guess IB 4. If you can have that group, man, you can move mountains, and again, we had a really good run of success, for baseball with you guys, obviously basketball with Siena. My best couple of years at Georgia Tech, we won the ACC championship. COVID was an element of that, which was the worst thing and the best thing for us. But it was this cross collaboration for everybody, including the athletes, because that meant everyone bought into what we were doing, which again comes back to recovery because we're all going to need it, including coaches and staff members too.
I think baseball is unique in that, and you kind of hit on this, that you need to be able to do it every day to get better.
Yeah.
Like where football, you go get the crap beat out of you on Sunday, and that recovery is a different kind of recovery where you're trying to get your body in a place where you can perform again next Sunday.
Yeah.
And you're recovering from the physical blows and muscle pulls and all that kind of stuff. Where baseball, you finish up a weekend series on Sunday, I need to be able to perform on Wednesday, and then I need to do it again on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it's a different type of recovery. And I see it with high school kids a lot, where they have a really good offseason. They go and they get strong. And then by the time their window to get evaluated comes around in June and July, they don't have those systems in place for recovery, or at least the maintenance of that strength. And you get to June and July and you see velocity go down, you see run times go down, you see different other metrics that are fairly measurable as a proxy to strength.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that kids miss out on early on, and it's something that I know that college teams are really focusing on is let's build the base, but we need to be able to maintain that level that we've built in the offseason. How does that play in with like the in-season preparation and what kids are doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think
nutrition, is it sleep? Is it a combination of both? Like, I'd love to hit on that a little bit.
No, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there is this element of like peaking at the right time. It's easy to say, but very hard to do. And you need groups of people and a lot of things to kind of make that happen. But generally speaking, it's exactly the way that you described it is if you've done all this work early and then you don't do the right things to sustain it and let's say peak at the right time, showcases, like tournaments or other like the MAC tournament or like the end of year tournament, whatever it might be, playoffs. It's the worst feeling in the world. And then what tends to happen is you try and do more because it's like, man, my velocity's going down. I got to keep, well, bro, you keep like we're playing, you can't keep scoring. So I think the sort of easiest way to kind of go through it is for young people to be sort of as smart with their sort of fitness, strength and conditioning schedule as they are with their game schedule. And there's like, there's a million research papers on this and there's books on this and all these different things that these kids wouldn't and shouldn't read. But there's also common sense. You know what I'm saying? Like if you've got something big at the end of the year and you're sort of like building up through volume and then, you've got a tournament or a showcase or something that you can play with, like I said, the volume that you're doing. Like you're not going to be able to like hammer as hard as you did in, the preseason or in the off season, late in season. But, every 3 or 4 days, you should be able to lift, a pretty good amount of weight because there will be like a block in there where you're like, okay, I've got a day off. I can lift that day. I've got a day of just kind of getting rolling and then I play or I pitch or whatever. You can definitely do that. You just need to be smart about when you do it. Recovery is, I think, to kind of like keep this going a little bit, is sort of a never ending thing because you're always recovering from something or recovering to prepare for the next thing. So like that's a never ending thing. So I think my first point, I guess, is what I'm saying is that do all of the work in terms of volume in the free periods, which is, preseason, off season, that kind of stuff, but then to kind of drip it in where it makes sense in the schedule. Obviously, if you have a specific as a pitcher, usually you'll kind of know in the order when you're going to come up. So there's typically ways that you can put it in, for field positions and otherwise, you may have to be a bit more specific about when you do and don't do it. So make sure you still do that because the point I'm trying to keep coming back to is that recovery should not take away from days that you can lift and lift heavy, which I'll get into in a second. And then because I don't want it to just sound like I'm going to just preach stretching and bands. So the work still has to remain. It needs to be more purposeful, like I'm saying. One thing I will say about that is important to know, which I didn't learn until even really my first couple of years at Siena, is there's a difference in lifting between volume and intensity, like it is with everything else. So in the off season, you can do tons of sets. You can do tons of different exercises. You can do a higher amount of reps, and you can kind of throw, particularly with young athletes, there needs to be some more intelligence than just what I'm about to say. But you can throw it against the wall and have at it. So that's volume. As you get into the season, you don't need the same amount of volume because if you've done it right, you've done all the work. What you need is the intensity. And intensity in the weight room isn't just sort of like, like tearing the roof off and like biting weights. Intensity is literally the poundage you're using. So just for a bad example, if you're doing 4 sets of 8 to 10 reps in the off season, if you can switch that and you can do 2 sets of maybe, 4 to 6 reps in season, but those reps are going to be pretty damn heavy. But because you're not doing all this volume, you're not crushing your body. You're just giving it enough to get the strength response you're looking for. So 2 sets, and don't live and die by what I'm saying. I'm just using this as an example. 2 sets of 4, and then move to the next thing. And you're going to keep that strength response because you've asked your body to move this large amount of weight, for this shorter amount of reps, but the intensity of the weights is going to elicit the physiological response you're looking for. So that's how I would think about lifting weights. To your point, about recovery, again, it keeps on going forever. For young athletes, the hardest thing is sleep. We've kind of hit that. 8 hours sleep is, what everyone will tell you to get. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but if you can get 7 or above, particularly as a younger person, you're doing great. If you want to have any type of career in sports, or if you want to be a high performer in anything you do, you have to be willing to accept that. And I'm saying that kind of dramatically because, and we all did it, put my hand up to play hard, have fun, and then just kind of like eke it out with 4 or 5 hours of sleep and then do it again. It is too much proof. And again, scientific proof, but there's also proof that you just know you're not at your best. So as young athletes, as young people, if you want to high perform and achieve in whatever you want to do, you have to say, look, I'm going to give all my energy and effort to baseball, but I'm also going to focus on sleep. It's non-negotiable. If you don't do that, you're not as serious about it as your career as you think you are. Part two, which is something that parents can help with, is obviously nutrition. Now, travel baseball, AAU basketball, my kids do a lot of dance and performance. They're always traveling somewhere. It's hard to eat well, and I get that. It's hard to eat well on a budget. I get all that. So there is times where you just got to do what you got to do. But nutrition too. If you're trying to gain weight and you're a hard gainer, you're like a lanky pitcher. That's me. You how do you think you're going to gain weight? You can keep lifting all day. You have to eat a certain way. So sleep and food, if you're serious about your business and you want it to, and I don't care if you're talking about playing at a very good school at D3 or you're trying to pitch in the major leagues, these two things are non-negotiable. And the sooner you get a handle on it, the better. Then, like I was saying, kind of to Keith's point, then you get into the other stuff. So sleep and food, non-negotiable. Then there's ice. Ice is hugely prevalent in baseball. There's a lot of discussions about when to ice and how to ice for a different time. But there's cold modalities. There's heat modalities. There's the baths. If you don't have baths, there's certain Normatec type things. Obviously, a compressive sleeves that you can put on shoulders and arms. You can put on your legs. I think you have to figure out what you have available, what is affordable for the situation you're in. And I think the third thing, if that isn't as much of a problem, is try and understand what works for you. Because again, what works for Keith and you and myself, there's going to be some baseline stuff that just feels good as a human, but there's going to be other stuff that will just feel a little bit different. And I think you're okay to experiment with those things, because when I was individualizing things a little bit at Siena, but very much more so at Georgia Tech and clearly in the pros, we did take an individualized approach with that stuff. And we even in the NBA, as part of our sort of like daily wellness questionnaire, one of the questions we would ask is what sort of at-home recovery modalities they chose to do. So not stuff that we had them do, like, acupuncture or massage or whatever. It was things like Normatex, foam rolling, things that they could do on their own. And then what we did, without getting too technical, is then take a look at how they noted their fatigue numbers. So how fatigued they felt on a scale of 1 to 10. So what they did the night before, how fatigued they felt the next day. And what that allowed us to do is to start to individualize a little bit, like, look, you feel the most recovered with a good night's sleep and when you use ice. You feel more recovered when you have, again, a good night's sleep and you use the Normatec boots, or maybe it's contrast hot cold. So then what we were able to do, and this is obviously pro level, but just to kind of get this to young people's mindsets, is let people understand, again, the non-negotiables and then the things that we could play around with. Like, for some reason, this guy does not recover well unless we see them. Well, then the onus is on you to get your ass in the training room earlier than everybody else, because you need to have dry needling. You need to have, sort of whatever it might be, modality, some kind of light therapy. So my point behind that is that there's non-negotiables. And then again, the second part is basically to do with what works best for you. The sooner you can learn those things, the better.
I think the piece about figuring, sorry, Andy.
No, I was just saying this topic is fascinating because I think it's the data and the science behind all of this has allowed us to even peel the onion back on this. And I mean, this is obviously your area of specialty, but it's such an interesting topic. And I think, to your point, everybody will have a little bit of a different path to figure it out. But the sooner you realize that there's some forces at play that you have control over that can have a huge difference in your performance. It doesn't matter if you're 16 and trying to get recruited, or if you're a college player listening to this, like, what adjustments do you need to make to your daily to show up to your start better, or to be able to perform at your peak more frequently over the course of a 56 game schedule. Like, this is just such important information for people to start to wrap their heads around, especially if you're going to enter an extremely competitive environment, which is our space, which is the baseball recruiting. It's
Yeah.
There's a lot of really talented kids, and to your point, like you have to find a way to separate yourself from them, and this is a great way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and Keith, I know you had a point there, but like I say this. I mean, I've said it in recruiting at Siena, like right through my own kids now. It literally is the things that are going to separate you, and usually the things that separate you tend to be when you go upstream from the way everybody else is going. You still have to do all of these things. You still have to put yourself in a position to be seen. You still got to, play in the tournaments, and you got to, all that stuff's true. It's not that bit. It's the other bit. It's the, are you the best sleeper in your group? Like nobody cares about that, but it may be the biggest separator for you. Some guys and girls are going to get by on a high level of skill and an extreme level of talent. And that you'll always have that like 1%. The NBA is full of them, but and that's a good example because that's the pro example. So they're like the 1% of the 1%. But what keeps them in the NBA or keeps them on the trajectory as like, the rookie of the year pick to, being an elite player, an all-star, $200 million contracts, is it does become those things. So even for the best of the best of the best, because when you get to that level, everybody's really freaking good. So there's got to be something that's going to separate you, and skill will to an extent, but you have to sustain that over time. Greatness is not a one-time deal. Greatness is something sustained over time. You can be really good, and we've all had that year where we were freaking lights out, or like that, whatever it might be. Greatness, if that's what you're seeking, slightly different, but just in general, that's a sustained thing. How are you going to sustain it? It's all of these things. All of these things. Every good comment you've had in every other podcast before this, anything that people think is interesting on this, is how do you sustain it over time, over year after year after year? And it's all of these things.
I think that's a super interesting point because I remember watching, and it's relevant to what you just said, but I watched the And One mixtape documentary.
Yeah.
And Rafer Alston was on there, who had a very good NBA career.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he's like, yeah, like there's so many guys that, when I started, and like the N1 guys who were like, yeah, no, I could have played in the league. But like, he's like, no, you couldn't, because you didn't take it seriously. You didn't want to sleep. You didn't want to recover. You didn't want to lift. You didn't want to eat right. And like to hear him, it was like, yeah, that's why he did what he did. And I like, to your point, like they're already outliers. And I think the thing that we try to hammer home, especially from a recruiting standpoint on this podcast, like if you're going to go play in college, you are an outlier.
Absolutely.
You're talking about 8% of people who are going to go play Division 1, 2, or 3 baseball. And like, there's 500 JUCOs in the country, and there's some NAIA schools. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll throw it around 10. But that means that 90% of kids aren't going and playing at the collegiate level. So you are an outlier. So then what does separate you?
Yeah.
And, from a baseball standpoint, there's so many people who come on here and like anywhere from Arkansas and Wake Forest all the way down to Rochester and Stevens. And every guy will tell you like the margins are so thin when you get into college. Like what separates you from being able to be a guy who's going to compete and play a lot, or a guy who, might not play a whole hell of a lot during the course of your 4 years? And to Andy's point earlier, like the weight room is usually the lowest hanging fruit for younger kids and for college kids that are younger, but it's all of this stuff. It's the recovery, it's the sleep. And look, I get it. It's hard to get a ton of sleep in college, but if you're serious about what you want to do and you want to win, like these are things that are just like, this just takes effort. Yeah. Like it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot of effort to be like, hey, I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
Like, I'm Andy's sleepy. I'm going to bed.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think like, and I wanted to say earlier, like it's figuring out what works for you. And I'm glad you've hammered that home because, like I don't really, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong. Like I don't really remember foam rolling ever when we were in college. Like that, I feel like that wasn't a thing. Like I remember having like lacrosse balls and like working out stuff in my shoulder and all that stuff. But like I needed to be in an ice bath twice a week.
That was
for me to be able to, like, I needed it. I was in there on Monday mornings after the weekend series. I was in there on Thursday before we started our series on Friday or Saturday. Like, I absolutely 100% needed that for me. And like, there was only a handful of guys who did it, but like, I needed to sit in there for 20 minutes and like needed it for my recovery.
Yeah.
And, I wish that it was framed up a little bit better during my career. Like, I'm not saying that it would have changed anything.
No doubt. Yeah.
But I think, like, I do think that, like, having the conversations now and the emphasis that's being put on it is huge for current student athletes, pro athletes, and also kids that are coming through, because it is something that this goes into your, we talk about with our guys all the time, like routine. Like, if you're a guy who throws on Friday or Saturday night, like, you have a routine to go throughout the week from your throwing and your practice schedule. Like, this is just as much your routine as anything else. Making sure that we're sleeping, making sure we're eating right, every year, inevitably, and this happened at Siena, it happened when I was at RPI, like, you have freshmen that come in at the back half of the year and they've lost like 25 pounds.
Easy. Yeah.
And it's like, what happened? Yeah. It's like, yeah, no, I just really didn't, like, the days just got spun up and I didn't really eat. And it's like, you need to eat.
Yeah.
Because we get to the end of the year and, like, not only have you lost everything you've gained, but also, like, you've lost more than you started with. Yeah. And you're a shell of yourself, and, like, you're not fast. You can't get the balls. Your bat speed is horrific. And it puts us in a precarious spot.
Yeah.
And I think the earlier that you can learn, like, some of these things about what pertains to you and how you can maximize your athletic experience and how you can go about optimizing what it is that you do, the better off you're going to be. And that could be playing Division III baseball, and good on you. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. It could be Division I and playing professionally, whatever. But the earlier you can start figuring those things out, the better off it's going to be.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think there's a bunch of things I think about it. I think, for young people listening and for parents that are helping their kids out, like, and I say this to my kids in their own pursuits, it's, if you start to make the commitment towards something, I always tell them, like, you don't have to do this. This life isn't for everybody. So you need particularly in a situation you guys are in, helping people come through. Like, if you just want to have fun with baseball, if you just have fun playing baseball, part of your high school team, whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to commit to something like a bit broader and deeper and long, whatever it might be, even if you, again, don't end up playing in the pros, it's not about that. But if you're committing to this, it's not for everybody. So so you need to kind of check yourself a little bit. Like, do I really want to do this? And the other thing I always tell them is, like, if it was easy, everyone would do this. Like you said, it's not easy to get sleep in college, but you know what? You can take naps at certain times. So you can kind of do both. Is it optimum? No. Is it purposeful and useful? Yeah, sure. Like, if you've had a late night studying, or let's say it's Friday night and you've gone out on a rager, good for you. But, like, let's also make sure that you nap during the day. Let's make sure there's no baseball that's important on the weekend. Like, don't worry why you're always injured and your shoulder hurts. Like, come on, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to make some decisions here. The other thing that I would say too is that, and I think I said this at one point before, is this can get extremely complicated because there is tons of research. There's specialists. There's also a lot of snake oil salesmen, as you guys know way better than I, that are going to sell, I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but a bunch of bullshit. And it's the same across sports. It doesn't really matter what it is in all fields. There's all of that going on. And so you do have to navigate that. There's a reason that there are biomechanists and physiologists and athletic trainers. They're all specialists. But just like you said, Keith, some of this stuff, if you keep it simple, is just common sense, and it's common sense to you, right? Like, everybody knows you should sleep more. You can't go, I just didn't know, bro. Like, seriously, even if you didn't know, you know that you're tired. You know you don't hit as well when you're tired because your reaction time's slow. You just know that about yourself. You feel crappy when you're tired. You know that I just felt kind of weird. My blood sugar was off. Well, bro, maybe because you didn't eat breakfast. I didn't think to eat breakfast. I mean, this was always because we lifted early at Siena, 6 a.m. time slot, which Coach Jackson wasn't the biggest fan of on a personal note, but we won't put him under the bus. But like, it was always like, man, I didn't have time to eat. And I was always like super empathetic to that because it's 6 a.m. But it also goes back to, like, yeah, but you're telling me you couldn't have grabbed a bagel the night before, or, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, of course, it's not the best way to do it, but we're in college, dude. We don't have a ton of time to do this. The freaking swim team, this is their lifestyle. They get up, they have to eat something quick. They do their lift with me, then they go into pool round 1, then they go to college all day, then they go to pool round 2. This is what they do. So, like, my whole thing with that is that, like, you feel crappy when you don't eat. You don't feel as good athletically when you don't sleep. You don't need a sleep specialist to tell you that. Now, if there's a sleep problem, if there's something about travel, if there's some optimum stuff that you're trying to figure out, that's different. But you can learn the ropes yourself. Like we just talked about, you need an ice bath. Some people like I just like to get some type of like massage type thing, whatever it might be. Because that's going to be one of the things that will come from a conversation. Like if people, I don't know where to start. I don't know what. It all sounds good. That guy at a PhD works with NBA players. All of this is true. Start at the beginning. I think Andy said it. These are the things you can control. I can't control these things. So, know thyself a little bit here. Like keep it easy. Like sleep, food, certain recovery modalities, taking it a step further. I think I said this before too, and I know this is what you guys help with immensely, which I think is just a tremendous thing that you guys are doing, is take a look at the entirety of your schedule. Don't just go day by day, week by week. Like what is a month from now looking like? Like you said, Keith, like that's going to be finals week. That's going to be a bear for me. Like I'm going to have a couple of blowouts with my friends on Friday and Saturday, 2 weeks before. Then I got to knuckle down because I got a bunch of stuff going on and I got finals. Like that's on you. If you're trying to take this serious, that's on you, And I know that was always one of those things in college too, when you would have these guys that had scholarships or partial scholarships, and they just started to realize they didn't love it that much. And I know it's not as simple as like give it back. I get that bit, but it's also like, this, like you got to know, like it's not for everybody, bro. But if it is for you, if it's something that you feel like you want to do, then go all in on it, because everything will be better for it, So I'll stop preaching to the choir on that point.
You hit on the idea of like optimum, right? Rarely, and this is true for sports in general, like the environment you're in until you are a professional, you have very little control over making it optimal. If you're LeBron James and the only thing you have to do is show up at 7:05 for the tip-off of the Lakers, it is all you do is work towards that 7:05 start. You have no other distractions, right? He's got family stuff, and I'm sure, but like essentially everything he does can be optimized due to his financial situation, the facilities he has, the people he has access to. It's not going to be the case until you're in that situation. And to your point, sometimes you have to make the best of an imperfect situation. And that's no different than in-game performance, because if everybody got to perform under the optimal setting, you'd have a chance to be successful all the time.
Yeah.
Like in baseball, if an umpire misses a call, it's not optimal, but you have to deal with it. I don't think it's any different than what you're talking about, is that you can convince yourself that it's hard to do because you had to get up at 5 instead of 7:30. To your point, like, well, grab a bagel.
Yeah.
Have something prepped the night before, make a protein shake. Like sometimes you have to make do with the situation and give yourself the best chance, not the optimal chance to be successful.
I love that. I love that. Because you're right. I mean, this is again true of all of us in every situation. Is exactly that. I mean, I won't even say any more on it because you said it perfectly. But until you do have that opportunity, you have to make this. And again, I think it's exactly what you said both times. What you just said now, and what you said, I jumped on the back of about controlling the controllables, to kind of like hit a cliche. Because there's certain things, like you said, you can't control umpire calls. You can't control, I don't know, something with travel schedules. You can't control whatever it might be. Those are things you can't control. But like if you can really take a look at what you can control, then you are at least giving yourself the best chance in the situation that may be suboptimal. But if you are already affected by the things you can't control, and then the things you can't control are just adrift, you have no chance. And maybe you get lucky one time just because that happens, but really you have very little chance of performing in a way you will feel happy about. It's just not a thing that's going to occur.
So to piggyback on the recovery thing, and a couple of the guys that we've spoke to have talked about leveraging the strength and conditioning portion of what they do at the collegiate level, that it's not just about the strength and conditioning, but there's an injury prevention component to it.
Yeah.
And I think that for young kids, the ability to play oftentimes is a huge indicator of whether they're going to get recruited or not. If you miss a large chunk of the season, and it just so happens to be the period of time where you're going to get a bunch of exposure to college coaches, Like that's a huge detriment to a lot of kids. Same thing when you get to college. What do they say? The best ability is the availability.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the recovery portion of this has quite a bit to do, or is at least tied in pretty significantly to the ability to play often, which I think is really, for a young kid, it's the development portion. You need to play to get better. You need to get those live reps. You need to be able to show up every day and feel somewhat healthy. I know some injuries are, you get freak injuries and you can't really avoid them, but could you talk a little bit about, just to kind of hammer home the recovery piece, that it's not just about the next day, but it's about the long term of creating a system that allows you to show up often.
I mean, the weight room is this, it's an incredible place because it should be, and it should be one of the most productive places in your group of things that you do as an athlete. Doesn't matter the level you're at. When it becomes unproductive, it's typically under coaches. Either you just get a strength coach who's just needs to get over himself a little bit, or maybe coaches are enforcing some things that maybe aren't helpful. But I've always felt, and clearly I'm biased because it was a huge part of my career, but it should be one of the more productive ones. And the reason is for what we've said. There's some things we just talked about that are very on the sort of more not extreme, but like one side of the spectrum of recovery: ice, rolling, foam rolling, Theragun type stuff. All that stuff kind of is usually training room, weight room. The act of lifting weights itself, heavy weights for that matter, when done smartly and done at the right time so it doesn't affect performance, releases hormones, which help you recover. So that's one thing that I used to talk about a lot in basketball, and because basketball's got a lot of growing up to do. Again, it says of maturation with strength and conditioning. If you lift heavy in season, again, smartly, which is a different discussion, it does release hormones, which are part of your recovery. Same thing in baseball. Again, you got to be correct about it. Those hormones are part of your recovery. Also, the act of loading your body doesn't have to be a big load, just a load. Could be a light kettlebell, could be a band, and going through a full range of motion is also something that will help your body recover. It's almost like active recovery. So there is also this misnomer about like kind of lying on my back and just stretching and, hitting a tennis ball in my rotator cuff, and then yes to all that too. But there's also active recovery and dynamic recovery. And there's different things that you can do that make you feel better. Like one thing that I did with some of the baseball guys, but again, not to kind of hit basketball too much, but a lot at Georgia Tech, is we would do lifts that just involve bands, which is very prevalent in your world. Without getting too technical, one great thing about bands is it's only loaded in the concentric motion, in the sort of like positive part of the movement. As soon as you do the negative or the controlled motion, it starts to unload because of how elastic bands work. Soreness comes in the eccentric portions, or again the negative portions of movements. That's when your soreness is heightened from certain chemical and physiological things that happen. So again, that's why it's very big in your world, because for a warm up or whatever. So for the basketball players, it's the same thing. Is coach, we got to lift. We just played yesterday. We're playing 2 days. I can't fit my quote unquote heavy lift in. We would do all the same movements, roughly, all with bands. And it had this great effect of me being able to get load at the endpoints, all in the concentric movement. I could move quickly because they could kind of force through these bands. It did not load or started to deload in the eccentric or negative portion, which is again where the soreness comes in. So all I'm getting is active recovery. I'm allowing these guys to make explosive movements, and I'm loading them in a way that was appropriate for their time. That's a huge, and like I would say 89% of the guys felt great after doing that, because they had to go through full range of motion and didn't have a big ass barbell on their back, which basketball players don't like anyway. So again, there's many sort of roads that lead to Rome. Some of this obviously is where you need good coaches and strength coaches and athletic training. That's a little bit different. But again, I think this goes back to the point that the weight room is one of the most productive places, because it should make you bigger and stronger when fed with sleep and food and whatever. It should help you recover through smart training. It should help you, if you unfortunately have one, recover from an injury, because you're going to do your rehab in there. So you could literally come in the weight room every single day. I don't really recommend that. But if you're in there 5 or 6 days a week, you don't have to do the same thing every time. And all of these things will help you recover, help you feel better, help you throw harder, help you, whatever it might be. So some of that is variety is the spice of life in the weight room. Obviously, again, you need good practitioners, but that's why it can be so helpful for recovery. So again, for young people who are seeking it out, go find it. It will absolutely be a game changer for you when done correctly. But also be aware that there's many, many, many things you can do in the weight room that elicit different responses, reps and set ranges, different types of, heavy metal stuff to band stuff. Why kettlebells are around. One thing that we didn't do a lot of that I've seen that's been fairly big in overhead athletes like tennis and baseball. These like, I think they're called Indian clubs. They're like just club-like apparatus. It goes back to ancient times, and it's this very rhythmic movement that people can make, and you have to learn to do it. But the sort of rhythmic part of it is very good for recovery, but also sort of conditioning rotator cuffs. And God knows it was probably used for warfare back in the day, for the ability to be able to throw things and hold things and strike people. But it's the same thing. But that does not look like my usual rotator cuff stuff. It's a completely different beast. So the weight room will become a separator, like we keep saying. It should be one of the most productive parts of what you do. And again, if you're serious about it, it's going to be present until the day you hang it up. And then you don't want to be a fat old guy. So you're probably going to be in there anyway. So you're never going to leave it. So, that would be my take on that.
All right. I got another question. For a young kid, the strength base is something I hear a lot about, right? And you need to be able to build up a certain amount of strength. And I think that's what most kids are trying to work towards. So like those 15, 16-year-olds, they need to get strong. But the movement quality is also really, really important. And it seems to be a bigger focus as they get older and they have that strength base, right? Like you look at college pitchers, it's probably less about how much weight can we move, but how can we move really well, right? Whatever your mechanics are. And I know that there's quite a bit of technology that allows guys to kind of delve into how people move. But specifically for a young kid, can you tackle the foundational strength component while also incorporating better movement qualities, or do those kind of need to happen in slightly different phases? That's something I've always been curious about, because there's always a rush to get strong. Yeah. But in baseball, in more and more now than it was even 10 years ago, speed and movement quality, it's become a huge part of the evaluation, and not sacrificing the movement quality just to get the strength is something that people ask about frequently. Yeah,
this is a great question. I'm going to give a bunch of examples, or I'm going to try to. My sort of initial response to that is that you absolutely can do both and should do both, and I'm going to give some reasons why in a second. I will also say there are times of year when you can really double, triple down on just movement stuff, deload periods of time. Maybe it's the tournament and, you're on the road, so you're in a hotel gym, or, guys are throwing or playing a lot, so they need more of a deload. But like I said, they should still do weight training things. So there are definitely periods of time when you can sort of like maximize certain qualities. And so, sort of movement mobility is a big wave of this part of our season, when it's, this is a bit more about heavy loading in the early part of the season. That is true. But in the workouts, everyone is going to have a warm up. Some people are going to have a cool down or a variation of one. After you've done the workout, you're probably going to go on the field, or later in the day going to go on the field. You will re-warm up then. So in those warm-up and cool-down pieces, before I even get into the actual training part of it, you are and should be doing movement quality-based things, because that's literally what the warm-up is obviously to fire up your central nervous system. It's to wake you up and shake off class and shake off home stuff, or whatever the hell, you get off the bus, shake it off. But it gets your central nervous system going. It's also warming your body up through ranges of motion that it may not have done until that part of the day, right? That's what it is. Well, that's literally what we're just talking about. So you're going to have that anyway in different pockets of it. So just make sure it's part of your training session too. Then you get into like the sort of like, okay, the focus of this session is we're trying to get bigger and stronger. So we're going to move an awful lot of weights, heavy weights, lower wet reps. That's our focus. But we also want to move through full ranges of motion that are appropriate for the weight room. Because if I'm doing half reps of something and it isn't specifically for a reason, like for a really quick reason, doing a quarter squat, very, very maximally loaded, is a good at a certain point of time for elite sprinters. So there are periods of time to do that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking developmental athletes. We're talking about baseball players. So if you're squatting through whatever you consider full range of motion with a heavy load, you already are assisting movement quality. Because I think one of the things, and this goes back to Keith's thing, probably even before Keith, you guys were in college, we just were throwing some weights around. It was almost like bodybuilding stuff. That's a whole different discipline on itself too. Half reps, quarter reps, like pump it out, max it out. Different. It's all different. You should be doing heavy weights, lower reps, full ranges of motion appropriate for yourself and for whatever the movement is. You should have a warm-up that is based on going through ranges of motion and mobility through certain joints and chains of joints. All of that can happen at the same time as you loading really, really heavy, because it would make no sense for you to try and gain size and strength and not make the muscle go through its full range of motion. The other thing, which because pitchers, at least in my experience, are so cautious and thoughtful in their upper body stuff, they're not usually, their risk is a little bit different. A lot of the hitters and position guys fall into this category of, just trying to blow it up in the off season, which I get because they want to hit harder and they want better pop times, all different stuff you guys worry about. But if you can't put your hand sort of like, elbow to the ceiling and kind of scratch your shoulder blade and almost meet with the opposite hand reaching up, if you're going to throw a ball across field from base to base, something's going to happen because you have no mobility through your shoulders in a sport that requires mobility through the shoulders. Yes, it tends to be one side. I understand that. But still, if you can't do that, that's a problem. That tends to go away when you're just blowing your bench up for the sake of bench pressing. Because there has to be this element of, yes, you want to be bigger and you want to be stronger. To become bigger and stronger, the food bit aside, you have to move heavier weights than you've done before consistently, and to keep adding further load that your body has to respond to. It responds by building larger muscles. That's just how physiology works. But again, you're a baseball player. You're not a bodybuilder. So you need to make sure you still have good range of motion through your shoulders, because you're going to be throwing a baseball at some point. Then you get to the point of the fact, like I was saying at the beginning, that throwing, hitting, and pitching are all rotational by nature. And there's a series of rotations actually through multiple different joints and much of your system, which is a different discussion. But it's rotational by nature. So then if you don't have the ability to rotate your body in a way that is productive, you are no longer a baseball player. You are now a bodybuilder. That makes no sense. The other thing that's really big in your sport is the ability to separate your shoulders from your hips, to be able to sort of preload tissue, to then be able to turn and put it all together and either throw a ball or hit a ball. Without even getting into biomechanics, you guys teach that. So everybody sort of knows that. So if you start to negate the ability to create separation and timing in those two areas because you're just bulking up, it doesn't matter what you're, I'm now 215, I was 195. Nobody cares, bro. Because you can't run, you can't hit, you can't throw, all of that's gone away. So to go back to the beginning, yes, I think you can do both at the same time. I think it can be, again, purposely scripted throughout the workout, full range of motion, whatever that means to you, with a good heavy load in the lifts. You have the pre-lift setup, you have the post-lift setup, you have the pre and post-practice setup. All of that is about movement. All of that is movement quality. The way that I did it as a strength and conditioning coach does not mean I'm the best one ever was. I certainly wasn't, but I know I was a good one. You came in, you did some type of mobility, you did some type of core work, which is just another version of all of what we just talked about. We lifted good and heavy when we needed to, where there was some specific stuff depending on your position of what you need, or if it was medical. And then you went to Keith and you just got better at whatever the hell that you needed to do. So that can happen all of the time. Then to kind of what you said, Andy, again, just to hit this point, there are certain points in the year when you can really maximize volume in lifting and really try and gain weight and gain strength. And then you don't maybe have to do as much of the mobility stuff in conjunction. It's kind of interspace between the lift, like I said. But there's other parts of the year where you really will end up doing that because it's either all you have available or because you're so heavy going the season that's the best thing for you at that time. But all along, you should be working on these qualities. All along, you should be doing it because you don't want to lose them because, again, you're a baseball player. You know what I mean, Keith? I know you dealt with this too. Is that some of the best weight room guys, and they were awesome to work with, and they were the biggest, strongest, look the best with their shirts off, all that stuff. There was a constant discussion with them, like, bro, I appreciate you because you set the tone for me in the weight room, but we can't lose track of the fact that you hit for baseball. If you want to bodybuild or blow it up, like I love it, bro, but like you got 4 years to do this. So let's do this, build a base, and then go bodybuild in the aftermath of your college career. So don't lose sight of why you're here.
And I think you hit on, I mean, all of that is gold. But to your point at the end that was and is in some circles still the prevailing thought process of why baseball players shouldn't be in the weight room doing things, is that you get too big, and then you can't move, you can't throw, you can't hit, you can't do anything. And there is some truth to it, but at the same time, like you can't argue the fact that there's guys that have gotten in the weight room and are far better because of it. And if you do it the right way and the things exactly that you're talking about, when it's done the correct way and smartly, you can find a lot more gains and be injury prevention and find those gains. And I always go back to the thing, like, and especially now, I'm older, like, you know, we played with guys who played professionally. I played with guys who made it to the big leagues. And, you know, Tommy Kahnle would come and throw at RPI. He's an Albany guy who's on the Yankees. Like, you stand next to Tommy Kahnle, and he's all of 6'2", 235. Like, his legs, like, first of all, his upper body is enormous. But secondly, like, his legs are absurdly big.
Yeah.
It doesn't negate him.
No.
From throwing 95 to 100 with 89 to 91 mile an hour changeups.
Yeah.
Like he can still, and look, we're talking about the 1% of the 1%, right? Like, but the point is, like, all of the vast majority of those guys, and I would argue probably across most professional sports, are enormous human beings. Mm-hmm. Like, depending on what sport they're doing, like, it doesn't negate them from doing those things well. Yeah. If you're doing it wrong, yeah, I suppose that we could have that conversation.
Yeah.
But if you're just trying to go from being a 155-pound sophomore to a 185-pound junior, I would probably, and this is my unprofessional opinion, but it's probably, you're probably not doing something so detrimental that it's going to be so bad for you.
Yeah.
It's going to negate your output on the field.
Yeah. And the best thing is, this is all great because it's all true. Because I mean, even like, again, going back to keeping it simple when you don't have your expertise, my background, whatever, is if you're trying to throw an implement further and faster, there is some biomechanical changes you can make. Obviously, there's some better technique to do it, but literally, you have to create more force to be like you there is no other way to do it, right? I mean, I know, again, this is making it overly simple, but I think this is important because I don't want people to listen to this and again, kind of like not have take homes. You're applying more force on an object or to an object to throw it, right? The only way you can apply more force is to create something different to put behind that. The only way you can do that is by changing something in you. So again, there's definitely some biomechanics stuff, which is why great coaching is important. To Andy's point, reps, quality reps, and doing it consistently, which is why recovery is important. But there's also like, you're going to have to get stronger. Now, again, you can do it stupidly, sure, and it becomes strength that isn't useful for your sport. To your point, Keith, that's a different discussion. You could do things that you can hurt yourself in the weight room, different discussion. But if you're trying to again get an implement to go further or use an implement to get someone to go further, that's the only way you can do it. Which again, so we're not even talking about what's going to separate you. That's what from him. It's just how are you going to get better at doing that one thing? It's going to come from overloading your system in a smart way that then it has to learn to adapt to this new overloaded stimulus. That is some level of central nervous system understanding. Then it's going to be layering muscle on top of it because you're constantly asking it to do something new. So it's going to have to provide you more muscle. Again, you got to eat the right way and sleep. But that's just how it works at the simplest level. The only way you do that is by overloading the body consistently in a smart way. The only way you can do that in the world that we live in is in weight rooms. Now, Peeling it back, though, got to sleep, got to eat. Keith, to your point, RPI, you can't be a coach who wears these guys out because the body responds. This is going back to the recovery rant, but just to kind of bring this full circle. Your body grows and responds when it's resting, not during. When I'm doing my heavy ass bicep set, because I'm trying to look nice in the polo shirt at 45, it's not, my biceps aren't growing in my sets. It's growing that night and the next day as I'm recovering, and my body's like, shit, I got to let this out a little bit because my guy's sleeves are going to get tight. That's in the recovery period if I'm recovering properly. But if I'm hitting it again, I don't know, doing something aggressive, rock, whatever it might be, it's not getting a chance to recover and grow. That's where the recovery piece comes in. That's why, like, if you're a really big weight room guy listening to this, as a young baseball guy, like, I got it, I'm a weight room guy. Make sure you're a recovery guy too, because your recovery and your rest is when you're building for either the next time you throw or the next time that you hit the weight room. So all of these things are true. All of these things come together, but it is physiologically impossible, other than some biomechanical changes that you can make, to be able to do what you want to do harder and faster unless you change your body in the weight room. It's just the way it is. But again, you have to be smart about it. And also, you know, Keith, your point is a little bit about kind of the growing up part of it. Is there is this fear that you will, particularly pitchers, you will, become too sort of like, I don't know, muscular on the shoulders, maybe.
Yeah, but that, like, that from a baseball term, that's what it'd be. Like, the fear is that you are going to be too stiff.
Yes,
like you don't optimize your move, like your body and how you move in the way that allows you to still be able to be successful from a pitching standpoint.
But I haven't seen, to your point, one elite pitcher, again, that has a sustained career. I'm not talking about a guy who has a good year that is just one of those weird dudes. It's just kind of, he's got the juice, but like a sustained career, or comes off an injury and comes back, because it's the same thing, who doesn't live in the weight room. And again, to where I was saying, Andy, it doesn't have to be what I just talked about with heavy squats. It's just in the weight room. It's like almost boring, repetitious pursuit of greatness. That's what they do. LeBron James spends some god-awful amount of $1 million, $10 million a year, something outrageous on recovery. And I used to tell these recruits that would come in that would eat Chick-fil-A and wouldn't, foam roll or whatever. Like, you tell me Bron can spend $10 million, you can't give me 10 minutes. Come on, bro. Like, you're just making stuff up. So again, it has to be there, but it's got to be.
You're right to the point of, like, it's boring, but that's where the changes, and that's where you can become really good, is in that boring piece.
Yeah.
And I do think, like, to your point, and it's becoming more relevant now at the upper levels of college baseball, where Wake was the first one with a pitching lab. I think Vandy has one now. There's a handful more out there. Yeah, but the biomechanics piece is becoming a huge piece. Yeah, to though, and like, it's all across Major League Baseball and professional level. Like, they're breaking it down, because again, like, it's the razor thin margins of what is there something that we can tweak to optimize what it is that you do well, so that you can continue to be really good from a pitching standpoint, or is the way that you throw, could that lead to a detriment down the road? And can we maybe tweak something to where that, like, we can avoid that, where, hey, if your arm slot, our data shows, like, there's a 25% chance you blow out. If you move it here, it's a 10% chance. Yeah. And, you know, like, it's little things like that I think, like, are becoming, and baseball is way behind in the technology game, right? Like, it's far behind a lot of other sports, I would argue, and specifically with hitters. So I was going to say,
I think biomechanics around pitching, because pitching is, at least in this last sort of generation, is where the money's at. My experience with it, which is reasonable, but again, not as much in baseball, hitting sort of the offensive side of baseball is going to be the next sort of bigger reveal. It's trying to understand, you know, again, how to, because I think there's been a good job, because there's less fear of shoulders with hitters, so that they've been better at, like, the lifting piece. Whether it's smart or not, it's a different discussion, but understanding better biomechanics with those guys is going to be interesting. I think that will be because I think people are trying it with stuff on the bats and this and that, but even with sort of, this is again going to get a bit technical, but with marked motion capture, which is literally where they put the little balls on you, it's very hard in sports anyway. So if I'm trying to either pitch or hit something with a bat, these markers are going to come flying off. But markerless motion capture is becoming even more of a prevalent thing, and it's getting better and better and better and better every year. And I think hitters, because as they turn, you can't see one hip and you can't see one shoulder. I think as the algorithms and the software are getting better to track and understand hitting, and I think people like offense in sports, as cool as shutouts are, people just like offensive things. I think that will be an interesting area of exploration, is what hitters do. I think that, to your point, would be the next thing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting because it's going to, I think on multiple levels, to your, like, about the snake oil salesman earlier, is you're going to find that the most, like, being efficient looks so different across body types, guys, sizes, right, left-handed hitters. Like, it's going, like, there's not going to necessarily, like, are there going to be some cores that, like, yeah, they all do some semblance of this really well, but it's not going to be like the hard and fast. Like, if you do these three things, you're going to find a lot of success offensively. It's more going to be like, hey, like, here's what Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez and Ken Griffey Jr. do. And this is what they all did well, but it looks different because, you know, one's left-handed, one's right-handed, and weighs 6'6", 230.
Yeah, this is cool because this is an exciting area of biomechanics as well. Because I think you're right. Until you are actually able to look at it from a legit biomechanics perspective, which is its own discussion because they have to then be able to speak to coaches, and you know what I mean. So there's some verbiage stuff. That's a different discussion. But what's interesting about it is exactly what you said. Is that there's a belief, like exactly what you said, that you can hit. Or I'll use basketball because it's easier for me to speak that way. Everyone wants to shoot like Steph Curry. Steph Curry, I'm 6'6", 6'7". Steph, I think, is 6'3". My arm length is different than his arm length. Center of mass is different. The way that my sort of brain is wired, how I make movements is different from him. So to your point in hitting, it's probably impossible, but everyone wants to shoot like him. Come to my camp, I'll help you shoot like Steph. Come to my camp, you can hit like this guy. What I think is being found and will be found in hitting is exactly what you said, is there's going to be ground truths. These are some things that you absolutely have to be able to do. If you can't do these things, it's not going to matter anyway. Once you have them, there's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 pathways to being an elite hitter or an elite shooter. And then what'll be exciting about biomechanics is you come in as young Keith, as a high school senior, if you're exposed to it, or a freshman in college, and we should, a few years down the line from now, know, okay, you are you, but you look and move and hit and strike and with some tweaking like this guy does, and then we can put you on a safe, hopefully from injury, pathway. As we learn more about these pathways, the plasticity of systems, meaning what is changeable and not changeable from a lifting perspective and also from a hitting perspective, because some stuff just doesn't change, or maybe it changes this much because it's not very plastic, but that much is actually where the gold is, or it changes this much, whatever. Understanding plasticity of systems. And then we put you on this safe way to become this elite hitter that isn't a one-size-fits-all prescription. Once that starts happening, it could be a really, really exciting thing, because the way that you talent ID guys is going to be different, but also the pathways you put them on as a coach. If you're open-minded enough to know, like, this isn't taking away from, like, I just know because I can see and feel it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can see and feel it and we can show it to you, man, there's going to be some interesting stuff coming in the future. And it isn't just going to be like, lower your shoulder and elbow. Like, yeah, cool, but I'm 6'6" and I don't move like that,
I think it gravitated towards pitching because it's the one thing in baseball that kind of happens in a vacuum to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
There's no variables that affect the pitcher prior to his release of the ball. So I think that when you're looking at motion capture, you're looking at being able to look at the spin rates and the arm angles and the release points, and all of that stuff is like very quantifiable. Hitting, there's a less tangible portion of it that is often the separator. It's the classic case of the guy who's a 5 o'clock hitter, who you throw him in a more controlled environment in batting practice, and that dude can just tallywhack balls all over the yard. But as soon as you get in the game, the pitch recognition isn't good. Maybe he has trouble with the ball in certain spots of the zone. Just kind of like a primetime performer. Like Manny Ramirez is probably my personal favorite right-handed hitter of all time. There's guys who have swings that look like him, but they don't get the same results. Maybe there's a way to get there, but to your point, I do think that the data, the technology is going to allow us to go, all of these guys do this one thing. And if you can't do that, none of the other stuff really matters.
Yeah.
But I think that's why pitching, I think that's why the data space and the technology seems to be in fast forward on the pitching side, because of it's a much more controlled environment to be able to evaluate. And things are kind of one-to-one. Like if you're a pitching coach now, and most of these guys will tell you this, if you give me a track run report and you give me video, I can pretty much tell you outside of the intangible stuff, like how tough is the kid, how does he like to compete. But from like a pure performance standpoint, I can tell you that kid's good enough to pitch for me. It's so much harder to do that with a hitter, because you could have 110 mile an hour exit velocity, but if you can't make contact when a guy throws a breaking ball, like that stuff doesn't really. But if you throw 96, I probably got a spot for you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. I agree. It's exciting. It's an exciting time. The sort of like interaction between technology, I guess math or analytics, not in the sort of like statistics side of it, but understanding from a technology. And then where sports is right now, it's an exciting time. And I think the ones that are open to adopting it and doing it the right way, it'll be exciting to see what happens just in general across the board.
Well, if you want to dive down the X rabbit hole, you can find some old baseball guys that basically think that data is the freaking devil. Where I think in today's game, the guys who find success from a coaching perspective are able to move between both worlds.
I agree.
Where you can get to that, my experience tells me this.
Yeah.
And now I have the data to back up my hypothesis.
Yeah. No, this is true in all sports. Basketball gets it too. Like, analytics ruin the game and all this stuff. I mean, there's a few things about it. One is whether they're right or not, it's here and it's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's like anything. It's like cell phones now. I mean, when I first started working at Siena, I think I had a flip phone, and I'm not that old. I'm not, believe it or not. So like it's there whether we like it or not. It is prudent, therefore, upon us as coaches and practitioners to utilize it in our space and not deny it. Same reason that grandpa can't text me when everybody else is texting. It's like, I just want to wish you Merry Christmas, Granddad. Like, just answer, you know what I mean? Like, it's prudent upon us to utilize it. However, and I work in extremely high technology right now in the biomechanics space, but there is this constant discussion about art and science. But there's no reason why they can't exist. Like there's like experience and coach's eye and feel are things that I believe, like you guys do, will always be present. But it doesn't mean you should turn your way from like backfilling it with data and objectivity, and because maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're right. If you are in the middle somewhere, you as a good coach should be able to augment change. It's also, I think, upon us as really upon the next generation too, because I mean, I'm not old, but I'm 45. So the 20-year-old strength coaches and coaches are coming up. It's upon, they need to take care of the game too. And so if the game, it has been damaged by an intrusion of science and analytics, we know it's not going away. So then it's incumbent upon them to be better resourceful with it, to reshape it, just like we shaped it, just like the field guys shaped it, just like Moneyball shaped it, whether you like it or don't like it. All of that stuff, it's incumbent upon us to not turn away from it, but to use it appropriately. And to your point, Andy, is to put that art and science together, because it's all the reason we always talk about art and science, because they're always going to be hand in hand with each other, whether we like it or not. So the best coaches and the ones that we've liked to be around, they grab both of those things and put them together. So, I mean, that's my little speech on that. And I think, again, where I work, it's very, very, it's a motor racing team. So it's very data driven, because that's how vehicles are. I work in this biomechanics lab, which is unlike any other one in the world. and I work with people who are bioengineers and like elite mathematicians and they're unbelievable people. But there is this element of keeping like the soul in what we're doing because we're dealing with people and we're dealing with sports and we're dealing with coaches and parents and athletes that are just trying to get better. And yes, money and winning and losing, but the soul has to remain in it. And that's the art part of it. I don't think you'll ever get away from it.
Yeah, I think that the good coaches are the ones who leverage it, but realize that at the core of it, you need buy-in in the people, the relationships that we're going to make things move, the culture that you create within a program.
Yeah.
I also think it's unique that the kids who are coming up now, they are much more
literate,
in tune with the technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can get your coaching points across with data now. And I think that's a superpower if you're a coach, where you can take that kind of less tangible thing that you see. But now if I have data that I can bring to a player that says, hey, remember when I was telling you this in the cage the other day? Well, here's why. And here's the concrete data to show you. I think that's a new way to be able to communicate it in the young coaches who don't swing super hard to the analytics side.
Yeah.
If they can come back to the middle, they're going to be in great shape.
The
coaches who are from an older generation who are willing to come back to the middle and leverage the data that they have at their fingertips, they're the ones. The people who go to the extremes of it, they're going to lose sight of the capability. And we talk to coaches all the time, but I think the ones who are the best at it, they talk about using the data as a tool, not as an absolute, but as a tool to either get across their philosophy. Sometimes it's just really simple to be able to present to a kid, here are the percentages.
Yeah.
And when a high percentage situation comes up and it proves why you do a certain thing a certain way, it hits home with kids now. Where 20 years ago, if you sat down and you broke that stuff down with a lot of kids who came up in our generation, it probably falls on deaf ears because nobody had ever talked to us about it before.
Agreed.
But all these kids can read a TrackMan report. All these kids understand the different statistical breakdowns of pitch counts and count leverage and different stuff from a hitting perspective. The coaches who decide to use that are the ones that I think, and you see it. I mean, it's pretty obvious. The programs that succeed at a really high level, they are leveraging data. It's not, they're not groundbreaking. They just leverage it in a way that's really useful for their ability to do what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's because, like I said, it's not going anywhere. And in fact, it's just going to get better and more finite. And I mean, and I think and it has affected sports, the way that the NBA is right now, which I think they're starting to see the negative effects of it a little bit. From sort of like the heavy level analytics and sort of what viewers are looking for. But each generation, it shaped it, like when statistics really started getting used, it was the teams that used statistics early that were the most successful. I know Moneyball, to use that because it's an easy example, has like kind of swung a little bit, but the proponents of it that used it well, obviously the Cubs and the Red Sox back in the day under Theo, utilize aspects of it. And there's luck and there's all the other things that come into sport, which again is the art part of it. But you can't deny that that's what happens, So the same thing with biomechanics, the same thing with the next wave of stuff. So if you use it as a tool, I like what you said. If you use it as a tool, it's just like anything else that you've got. And then the best coaches, what I found, any instance I've used technology, the best coaches usually aren't far off from what the data tells you. Because like that's how well it should match up. Like it should, and again, also to your point, though, if they're wrong, they're not so usually fundamentally massively wrong. It might just be a little switch up, and if they're willing to switch it up, then it just makes you a better coach. And you couldn't be more true. I mean, the NBA is funny because probably over a decade ago now, 15 years ago, there was way more hesitation for basketball players in the NBA to want to use any type of technology. Some of that was also because it was used punitively. So it was like, oh, this is down, less contract, some type of fine, whatever, which is just an inappropriate use of technology. But like you said, the wave of guys that come into the NBA, MLB, whatever now, or even college, to your point, they've had Apple Watches, Aura Rings, you name it, on their phone, access to TrackMan, some level of force plate analysis, whether it's good or bad, from way back. So they just heart rate monitors in ways that weren't used before, you name it. So they come in these NBA weight rooms, and it's really not that big of a deal. But a decade ago, it was a big, like, oh God, shift. And so it's, again, this is the point we both make. It's coming either way, and with it is this generation of guys, and they have more say than they used to. So when old sage wisdom coach sat me down and told me something that was gospel, I wouldn't dare question him, because he's a 40-year-old 40 years in the trenches baseball coach. I wouldn't dare question him. These generation of players, for good or for bad, that's a different discussion, question more. They have more access to stuff than before. They think critically in ways, whether they're right or wrong, than before. So to your point, you need to sort of meet them at where they are with your sage wisdom, because that way they're going to listen to you in ways that the other ones won't, because it's just not how athletes operate anymore. And again, you can argue it's good or bad. That's a different discussion. It just is what it is,
Yeah, and I think to your point with what you're doing now, the keeping the soul in it is huge. Mm-hmm. And that, there's a kid who played for me. His dad's been coaching professionally for a very long time, and he was with a big league club, and he was like, the analytic guys keep saying it's this, and this for this guy. He's like, but we're taking the human being out of it. They don't know that, his kids are across the country and they've been sick and can't go home. And, he's like that's weighing on this guy, and he hasn't been able to sleep and recover. And that's why it's not because he's doing X, Y, and Z. It's because there's things outside of the realm of whatever algorithm you're running that is causing this. He's like, and that disconnect has been, super tough to try to get through to some of these people. And I think that's using it in a way that, might be like, you have to change in order to understand some of the things that, at the end of the day, we're still dealing with human beings. We're not robots. There's things that are going to be hard and fast, but I couldn't agree more. I think the technology piece, there were kids when I was at RPI, and look, I was at RPI. It's an engineering school. It's a STEM school. The kids are very smart. And not only did they have access to this, I didn't grow up with it. I had to teach myself a lot of this stuff, or ask other people that are way smarter than me what this all means, so that I can at least digest it and get it back to them, so that I can coach with it. I never use, you don't use it as this is hard and fast, but hey, here are the things. Yeah, man, this is why, and it's easier with technology. We had a kid who he threw a slider and a curveball, and his fastball, slider, changeup all tunneled out of the exact same spot, and you could see it. And then his curveball went straight up. And I was like, we had the conversation with that. I was like, we should scrap the curveball. It doesn't do anything. It's completely different than all three of your other pitches. Everyone knows it's a curveball. That's why it either gets taken for a ball or it gets hit, because it goes straight up out of your hand. And it wasn't not that he didn't believe me, but it wasn't until I got the heat map of the ball coming out of his hand. It was look, all three of these pitches all come out of the same spot. That's why you have success with it. Your curveball goes straight up that's not going to lead you to have success. Yeah. And it was that aha moment of all right. But yes, it's because I can see it, and I've done this for 15 years, and I know that. But with the new generation of players, you can, not that you have to prove it to them, but in some ways you do. Yeah. And it gives you a better way of saying, instead of taking video of hey, here's Rapsodo, here's where the ball goes, here's the trajectory of it. It's completely different from everything else. And that's why it's not a good pitch. Yeah. So let's stop throwing it. Yeah. And it's a far easier conversation, because I can see it. I see why it's not good. Yeah. And, and I think to your point, kids do question more now, and it's not a negative. Yeah. And I think it's actually for better or for worse, I think it's a better thing, because they want to be coached and they want to know why.
Yeah.
And like they're trying to do, instead of like when we grew up, it was just like, hey, jump. Okay, let's do it. Like there was no reasoning behind it sometimes. Now it's like, well, why should I do that? Like, okay, here's why. Because the data is showing me this, and this is what it's telling us. It's telling us it's not good and you're not going to find success. And if you want to be good, we need to scrap this or we need to make this better because this doesn't play here. And when you have both, it's like, oh, okay, like not only does he know what he's talking about, he's also showing me with data and technology that, yeah, it doesn't work and I should probably change.
Yeah.
And it makes those conversations easier.
Yeah. Well, if your answer to the question why is because I said so, that's a fundamental problem.
Yes.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
But that's the generation that we grew up with. And now, if you're a coach, you need to be equipped with the information as to the why. You need to have thought about what is the why. Why am I making this adjustment? And data can be the bridge to paint the picture of the why. So it doesn't just become, like just an example that you have in your head. Now I can prove, well, here's the why, because I have the data to show you that this is the correct way to do it, or this is the way I think we can do it to get you to a different level of performance. And I have the answer now. So coaches out there who are going through this, and, there's young guys that are going through this, that be prepared to answer why. If one of your players asks you, well, why am I doing something? You should have a good answer for them.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to agree with the answer, but you should be able to give them an answer as to why something is occurring.
Yeah. No, I agree with both of you guys. I always found, and again, I never coached where I had like the terminal say, because I like obviously that happens on the field or on the court, but in the weight room and in the applied science area in the NBA is that I sort out that a little bit because it kept me on point. You know what I mean? Like you said, if you're not asking me why, then it needs to keep me on track. You know what I mean? Because I don't think I'm wrong, but I just want to double check. I want to, maybe I'll learn something new, so I think it keeps you growing. And I think, I've said this before, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Most of the biggest lessons I ever learned was not, and I have a PhD and the things we talked about, but the biggest lessons I learned were from athletes. And it wasn't in the NBA the same way. Like there was a couple of guys that was always like really not critical, but like cynical of like data I would show them or maybe something I brought to the table. And they asked really good probing questions about essentially why. So I had to have my shit together because also I'm way lower totem pole from a $200 million player. But I was always like, no, this is good because it keeps me on point as a professional. And it keeps me like, I'm going to get, and I was always willing to admit if I didn't know something. I've always been comfortable with that. I'm going to come back and find out. And if you're right, kudos. If you're wrong, you have to give me some room here because, I have the data and I'm going to double check it. So yeah, I think all of this is great. And I think it is the way forward. And I think young players are just going to get more and more exposed. Like Keith said, they're just going to be more literate in it than we were. So yeah, it's not. Point blank, it's not going anywhere. So adopt it or not, it's up to you.
And it's okay to say you don't know.
Sure.
For all the coaches that listen, like I would say it.
Well, Keith, that's always what made
as much as you want to think that you know everything, like you don't.
But it's also, Keith, what made you good and allowed you to grow relatively quickly in a very saturated field. You know what I mean? Because like humility in coaching is huge. It's huge because you could be Coach Rossi, who's coached for 1 million years. I think there was dinosaurs roaming the earth when he started. But like he can't know everything because even if the game, because the game changed. Like we were talking about, I think it might have been off before we started recording this, is that, there's freshmen in high school that look like me now. Like, where the hell did that come from? You know what I mean? You can't know everything. The game changes, technology changes, culture changes. Different sports have like diversified where they bring players in, and there's young black kids playing lacrosse when maybe they didn't have the opportunity before, and baseball obviously is huge in South America, and basketball is across Europe. So now you're getting cultural differences and language differences. It's never, you're always going to have to, so you have to have humility. You have to be confident you know what you're talking about, but you have to have humility that you don't know everything. And again, I think, I don't unfortunately know Andy as well as you, but like that's why Jimmy's doing what he's done. Because, but I mean, like, you just were open to everything. That's why, whatever success that I've had is because I was always trying to be as like, have as much humility as I could possibly. And we all thrive because of it. And I would go and say, any one of your players or most of the players would appreciate that about you because you brought that to the table. You didn't F around. And you better, we're going to be doing this and this, but I have enough humility to be able to like grow us all together. And I think to your point, young coaches, like, don't lose sight of that, because young coaches don't like that.
And it's huge. And, it's the inner Jocko, but like you take the ego out of it, and like, it's okay to admit that you don't know something. Yeah. It's okay to like, like you said earlier, I would always, especially when I became a head coach, like I would always ask my assistant questions. And finally, like there was a time where he had never coached before. And they were like, after the first season, he's like, why do you always ask me questions and then like not really do anything I say? I'm like, it's not like, I was like, it's not because I don't value your opinion. Like I'm asking because I want to make sure that I've thought through everything it is that I need to think through. And there are times where you'll say something. I'm like, damn, I didn't think of that. And then then I have to weigh, like, does that matter in this moment? Or like it didn't call for that situation, but you're not wrong. Yeah. But in this specific situation, no, like you're right. Like, but I think like sometimes like as an assistant, you get angry, or not angry, but you get frustrated because you feel like you might not have as big a say ultimately at the end of the day. Yeah. And it's not necessarily like you need to take that time to understand like you're learning.
Yeah.
In that process too, like what you were saying is valuable. It might not just be, and it's okay to ask afterwards, like, hey, why did you, I used to do that with Coach Rossi all the time. Like, hey, why'd we do this in this situation? And then like 54 years of baseball rolls through his mind. And it's like, well, it's because of this, 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 and this. And I'm like, damn, I didn't even think of three of those things.
Yeah, of course.
Like, okay, like that makes a lot more sense now. Yeah. And like, if you want to grow, like whatever industry you're in, but it's especially in coaching, like, if you want to grow, you need to learn from the people who have done this longer and have had success, and I just think that sometimes and it's hard, I think now with the technology where like a lot of kids kind of look at the older coaches who don't really embrace it that much. Or like, well, what does he know? Like,
he knows. And
that guy's won 1,000 games in college. Like it didn't happen by accident. He actually knows, like, maybe he doesn't know the technology as well as, the 25-year-old kid, but guy damn sure knows baseball. So like, listen, ask some questions. You might learn something here and there.
No, I agree.
I think that's the biggest thing.
I agree, because I think this covers a lot of things, including strength and conditioning coach. But I think people forget, particularly when they start coaching, that coaching comes from teaching. Mm-hmm. To be a good teacher, you have to be, have humility and be vulnerable to the points you're making, and you have to continue to learn. You know what I mean? So if you as a young coach coming in and you're trying to like puff your chest out and feel it out, I get all of that because you got to get your legs under you, but remain humble because you're going to get found out super quick. Be vulnerable because you don't know everything, and there's some stuff's going to come and smack you in the face. And be a lifelong learner, because the moment those three things stop, your career is going to get really stunted. That's we don't have to go further than that, but that those three things are paramount. Don't forget, coaching is teaching. When people start forgetting that stuff, man, you're like, it's not about subservience of athletes. It's not about just imparting like my way. It's, people talk about discipline. All of this is true, but you're still a teacher. To teach, you have to be able to impart knowledge. For you to gain knowledge, you have to be humble. You have to be vulnerable. You have to keep learning. So don't ever forget that stuff. I don't care what your thing is.
And it's the epiphany moment that I had like 6 years into my coaching career was understanding that you need to coach each kid differently to a certain extent. The same principles, the same foundation, but it's the people management that I think separates a lot of coaches and their ability to distill information. can you figure out a way to coach the same core principle to different kids who receive information differently? And I think that's when you get with a guy like Coach Rossi, is that he might not know the tech side, and he probably does more than he would admit, but you can never learn what that guy has learned from a people perspective.
Right.
And the way that I think about it is like, and this applies to like industry and business, is you can teach yourself skills. You can teach yourself how to code. You can teach yourself how to input data into a model. You can teach yourself how to tune a model. But the experience that comes in that field, you can't get it without being there. And I think in the coaching world, if you're a young coach, yeah, you can get spun up on TrackMan data pretty quick. There's a ton of resources out there, but you'd be remiss to not talk to the pitching coach who's handled people for 20 years, because that's where the magic's made. And I would imagine that in your field, how you communicate that information down from person to person is going to be different, because there's certain levels of literacy from a data perspective, from a biomechanics perspective, that you might have to dumb it down significantly for somebody, but you still have to get the same point across. And your audience is really important when it comes to coaching. And I think that this world of data, it's the people who can distill complex ideas and complex processes down into something simple that's digestible to everybody. Those coaches, that's a superpower in today's game.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's and then the thing that's interesting about the distilling it down is, and I've said this before in a few different places, is it's important to recognize, not you, but just people listening. It doesn't mean that me talking to my, I don't know, like Major League Baseball pitcher and dumbing it down is because he's not smart. He's just not a PhD in biomechanics. He's a PhD in pitching. So, and then the other thing, and this is an NBA example for my world, is that if you're dealing with pros or even college players, the Keith's whole thing about how crazy college is in terms of the things going on, you have to worry about practice, after practice, film, lifting, treatment. If you're a pro, you have family responsibilities. You are your own business. You have businesses that rely on you. So when I roll up with my TrackMan sheet, it better be quick. And it's not because he doesn't care and or doesn't or is dumb. It's just, it's a time thing. And to your point, it's just his specific knowledge base is in pitching a baseball. So same thing with coaches. When I used to go to coaches, you pick the sport, you pick the level I've worked at, is a lot of them are super smart people in certain ways. Doesn't mean they can read the Excel spreadsheet the way that I can. So it's ignorant of me to expect them to do that, but it doesn't mean that they're dumber than me. It just means that they have a whole different set of skills and unique perspectives and where their expertise lies. So it's actually incumbent upon me not to be dumb, and to your point, provide the same information to them that I'm collecting or giving to the pitcher. So yeah, I just always like to make the point that, particularly with athletes, because athletes get this bad rap, and it's not true. Some of those dudes and ladies are incredibly smart people. They just don't know biomechanics like I do. It's just, it's in the delivery. So Andy was very well stated.
It's still a world of people.
Yeah.
So, well, we've had you on here quite a long time. Appreciate you taking the time. Anything you want to add before we kind of wrap this thing up?
No, I think Keith knows me, we could do this all night, but I should probably go. Happy holidays. I don't know, when this is going to go out. Happy holidays to you two specifically and your loved ones and anybody listening. I would just say, I would have done this for Keith in the back alley of a shitty bar in Rochester. Because I love him to death. But I will say, I think what you guys are doing, A, providing this type of information, but also B, in terms of driving people to the right places, in terms of understanding recruiting and development, is incredibly laudable. And I can't tell you how much I support this enough. I wish it was present across sports, because it is a meat market, and there are kids and parents who get taken advantage of on a daily and yearly basis. So I am thrilled you guys are doing this. I am happy to be part of it. And if I could ever help in any way other than this, I would be more than happy to.
I would greatly appreciate that.
Thanks, DT. This was amazing.
It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for letting me dip into your world a little bit.
Awesome. You imparted quite a bit of wisdom and a lot of really good takeaways and a lot of good stuff that people can learn from this. And thank you so much for your time. And maybe we'll get you back on here again. We'll do a part 2.
Love to.
All right.
Enjoy the holidays, guys. Appreciate you. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
team.
Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.